It was always obvious that after the initial flurry of tariffs and frenzied negotiations because of the tariffs, President Trump would continue on a daily, a weekly, a monthly basis to continue to bully the world in whatever ways he could find. On the principle that every action creates a reaction. I've said for some time that eventually the various countries of the world would start to push back. Maybe they'd put it off for as long as they could while they were developing new trade deals with other countries, bolstering their defense capabilities, finding new suppliers for critical goods. But sooner or later, Trump would try to push them over a red line beyond which they weren't prepared to go, or they would just come to realize that, like the literal playground bully, because you give in the first time, he will just keep coming back again and again for more and more. In the case of the EU, the Trump administration is seeking to use the ambiguities in the original outline trade agreement to push through other things that it wants to force the EU into doing. Specifically, Trump's Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick told the EU on Monday that the United States might be prepared to reduce its aluminium and steel tariffs for the EU if and only if the EU reconsiders its digital rules. As you'll remember, President Trump is very keen on American big tech firms being able to dominate the world unchallenged and under-regulated. The European Commission, not such a big fan of that vision, something which has been true about the EU for decades. Indeed, however many hours in your life you've spent clicking away cookies consent boxes on websites, you can chalk those hours up to the European approach to regulation, bless their hearts. But I digress. Lutnick's words did not go down well. Europe's antitrust chief Teresa Ribera told Politico this: "It is blackmail. This being their intention does not mean that we accept that kind of blackmail." She added that the regulations were a matter of sovereignty and could not be brought into the scope of a trade negotiation. Now, as far as I'm concerned, those are words to stir the soul. But do they really mean it? Because we've heard fighting words from the EU before, only to see it melt relatively quickly under pressure. The legislation in question is the Digital Markets Act, also the Digital Services Act, the former being about ensuring fair competition, the latter about curbing illegal online content on social media. Neither cause, you'll notice, is especially close to the US administration's heart. And more specifically, both are seen as major barriers to the tech billionaires, who do things like paying for White House ballrooms on demand. Ribera also added this: "We respect the rules, whatever rules they've got for their markets, digital market, health sector, steel, whatever, cars, standards. It is their problem, it is their regulation and their sovereignty." So it is the case here. Now, this doesn't acknowledge Trump's conviction that it's one rule for the United States and a totally different rule for everyone else. Tariffs for the United States are beautiful. Tariffs for anyone else is ripping America off. But such a self-obsessive perspective only really gains sway if the world conspires to go along with it. It has as much power as you grant it. And maybe that is finally coming home to people in the way that means they will more robustly push back from now on. Maybe. But Europe specifically has a big weakness, which is that it's a community of nations and divide and conquer works only too well in such a community. So, for example, Germany's Federal Minister for Economic Affairs, Katharina Reiche, told reporters that she was actually in favour of loosening the EU digital rules. My take on that is that Germany is starting to get a sense of its own potential for growing back into the powerhouse of Europe it used to be, now the world is in a more volatile state. She said this: "Germany has made it clear that we want opportunities to play a part in the digital world. Because sure, if Europe is going to develop its own online tech champions, there will be keen competition between the European nations to become the hub for that. And Germany, which used to be the industrial powerhouse of the continent, would naturally see itself as the leading contender. The Trump team will happily seize on such dissent regardless. They already achieved a similar victory earlier this month when South Korea caved to the US in pulling back on its own proposed digital competition rules. And this is the reality of a new world. The most powerful nation in the world will keep coming back for more and more on anything it sees as restricting its dominance. Those who want to hold on to the old rules, they are going to be tested. Many will be found wanting. Amongst whom, perhaps, we can count Switzerland. Poor, neutral, inoffensive Switzerland, the bastion of reliability and orderliness. Well, mostly. It found itself inexplicably walloped by some of the highest Trump tariffs. A crippling 39% tariff was imposed on it. The country was so small in its own right, it never even got near the queue of countries negotiating with Trump's trained sharks before the deadlines kicked in. Well, as I mentioned earlier this week, it finally succeeded in getting an agreement to reduce those tariffs down to 15%. But law-abiding and orderly Switzerland only did so by giving Donald Trump, along with various trade and investment measures, but giving him personally a Rolex desk clock and a specially engraved gold bar, engraved with 4547 with reference to his presidency. Now, in old money, that gold bar would be barefaced corruption. And it turns out quite a lot of politicians and citizens are, notwithstanding the need for tariff reduction, horrified at what their country has been reduced to. Samuel Bendahan, co-president of the Social Democrats parliamentary group, said that it was unacceptable that Swiss foreign and economic policy was, quote, negotiated by billionaires and chief executives of corporations in secret meetings. The press described what they labelled as gold bar diplomacy as unseemly and pointed to an oligarch takeover. Now, for sure, some on the right shrugged it off as pragmatic, which of course is exactly how these things get to be done. But a former Swiss ambassador, Daniel Woker, told the Financial Times this: there is a sense from some in Switzerland that this was very close to corruption. I am not sure it shows Switzerland at its best. So close to corruption, you might arguably just call it corruption. Or how about blatant, shameless corruption? Blatant and shameless because the Rolex clock can be seen in recent photos right there on Trump's desk. Is it bribery if it's totally in the open? Well, maybe not. Maybe you call it instead tribute. It just depends if you're prepared to anoint Trump as your emperor. David Bach, president of the IMD Business School in Lausanne, Switzerland, told the FT this: it was the gold and the Rolex and the photo. There is discomfort with the optics of giving opulent offerings like that very publicly in a country which generally values being more understated and humble on the international stage. Understated and humble and paying a crippling tariff? Or subservient and feeding corruption and having a lower tariff? However, the agreement with the US still has to go through the Swiss parliament, and a final detailed deal would need to be voted on. It could even, under Swiss rules, be put to a referendum, although that would be on the deal, not on the demand to return all of the bling or anything like that. The government insists that it got the best it could achieve and rather feebly added, "We haven't sold our souls to the devil." That remains an open question for the time being. Will the political machinery of Switzerland ultimately endorse the world of tributes offered to the emperor in exchange for less gratuitous pain? Or will it stand up for the old rules it used to stand by? Maybe alongside the European Union. While we're thinking about that, Trump will go around bullying everyone else. So, for instance, today we heard that having boycotted the recent G20 summit because it was being hosted by South Africa, and as we know, Trump has opinions, soon the presidency of G20 will pass, as luck would have it, to the United States. Yes, the G20 summit in 2026 will be hosted where else but Miami. But today it was announced that South Africa would be barred from attending because, did I mention, Donald Trump has opinions? This is not the first time the US has arguably abused its status as the host by giving itself the right to pick and choose who's allowed in. We already saw the president of the Palestinian Authority refused entrance to the United States to attend the United Nations Special Assembly. Now it's South Africa and the G20. So President Trump said on social media, South Africa has demonstrated to the world they are not a country worthy of membership anywhere, said the man who wants Russia to be let back into the G8. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa said that the country was a member of the G20 in its own name and in its own right. He said this, its G20 membership is at the behest of all other members. And he added, South Africa is a sovereign, constitutional, democratic country and does not appreciate insults from another country about its worth in participating in global platforms. This has increasingly been how South Africa has stood more and more strongly against Trump's bullying as the months have passed. This is the point. The EU can stand up to Trump. Switzerland can stand up to Trump. South Africa has and is standing up to Trump. The consequence is Trump's rage, his determination to inflict some manner of pain and suffering in consequence, at least for a while. I mean, you could look at Brazil's Lula da Silva, who politely declined to respond to Trump's demands that his predecessor Jair Bolsonaro should be released from prison. He was then subsequently slapped with 50% tariffs on his country, but recently they had a positive meeting. The tariffs are now being reduced again. Trump is speaking well of Lula now. So take from that whatever lessons you will. The real pressure then for the next G20 summit is going to be on all the other members, because the logical response would be solidarity for all the members to say they will refuse to go if South Africa is not allowed to be there. That it's not the role of the host of the meetings to pick and choose who can attend. Will they do it? Maybe. If they do, you should expect they'll do it quietly behind the scenes, giving Trump the ability to back down and save face without provoking his wrath down on them, as they would if he did it in public. But as we've seen with the European digital rules, a large group like this is very bad at acting in concert, showing solidarity when it's not clear why it's necessarily in their own national interest. So it'll rather depend on just how many more bridges Trump has burned by then, how many fights he's picked, how many people are concluded that if they don't make a stand now, it's just going to go on and on and on. I think what we're seeing are the signs that people are starting to turn. But as with all of these things, it won't happen all at once. It will be scores of individual leaders grappling with their own situation, their own base of domestic support or criticism, and the nature of the provocation from the Trump side. But I'm definitely thinking that 2026 is going to be the year of a pushback, with more and more joining the likes of China and Brazil and Canada and South Africa in not caving when Trump comes calling. 2025 will stand as Trump's best year. The damage and the consequences will outlast him, but the decline and fall will start pretty early and will undoubtedly be full enough of drama to keep many people satisfied that the rules of cause and effect still remain in force.